By the end of this unit, you should be able to distinguish verbal and nonverbal communication, explain the 6 functions of nonverbal communication, and describe the different types of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication can be defined as oral and non-oral messages expressed without using words. There are 6 functions of nonverbal communication. The first function is complementing. Complementing means reinforcing a verbal message. For example, you can say "well done" and also give a thumbs up at the same time. So the thumbs up is reinforcing the verbal message of "well done." Secondly, nonverbal communication can contradict a verbal message. You can say "I am fine," but your face shows something else. And what your face shows is likely what the receiver is going to take more seriously than what you are saying. Thirdly, nonverbal communication functions as a way of repeating a verbal message. You can ask someone to leave the room, and you can follow that expression with a gesture of your finger pointing towards the door, indicating that the person should leave the room. The gesture of pointing towards the door is repeating the verbal message that has already been mentioned. Fourthly, nonverbal communication can function as a way of regulating verbal behavior. For example, when someone is speaking, you can raise your hand to indicate that you want to say something, or you can shake your head to show disagreement with what the person is saying. By doing that, you are in a sense regulating what the person is going to say or will say. Turn-taking, which is a necessary part of human communication, is also a form of nonverbal communication. Because as a speaker, you always know when it is your turn to speak, because the other person will indicate non-verbally that you can now come in and make your point. The 5th form of nonverbal communication is called substitution. This is where there is no verbal message at all, but instead only nonverbal signals are used to communicate. So instead of saying yes, you can just nod your head. That is substitution. Instead of telling someone "I love you," you can maybe give them roses to express your love for them. The last function of nonverbal communication is accenting. This is where you emphasize a verbal message using a nonverbal signal. So the key word here is emphasis. There are many categories of nonverbal communication. In this discussion, I am going to focus on 8. The first category of nonverbal communication is called kinesics, from the word kinetic, which shows movement. And kinesics is defined in terms of gestures and the movement of the body. So the way you sit, the way you stand, and the postures that you assume, all these are body movements. When you show someone a thumbs up, that is a gesture. When you point towards something, that is a gesture. So gestures and postures define body movement, and we use all these all the time. It is also important to note that gestures and the way we use posture can vary from culture to culture. Nonverbal communication is universal, but there are variations according to specific groups of people or according to specific cultures. The second type of nonverbal communication is called oculesics. That is the use of eye behavior. It is important to know what eye behavior means. For example, when someone winks or when someone rolls their eyes, those two forms of eye behavior do carry certain meanings which the receiver will have to interpret in the context of the communication act. The third category of nonverbal communication is called vocalics or paralanguage. And paralanguage refers to the pitch, that is the highness or the lowness of the voice, volume, the loudness of the voice, stress, the way emphasis is placed on certain words, and intonation, that is the variations in the way the voice is used, such as the use of a rising tone or a falling tone. We defined nonverbal communication as oral and non-oral messages expressed without the use of words. Vocalics implies the use of oral messages, the use of the voice without verbal signals attached to the voice. For example, screaming is oral but not verbal. So the tone of your voice then will carry the meaning. The highness and the lowness of your voice will also indicate a particular meaning depending on the context where you are. It has been shown by research that when a person is lying, the pitch of their voice tends to rise. So the voice can give certain meaning to certain messages depending on the context. The fourth form of nonverbal communication is proxemics, which is the use of distance in communication. Some refer to the concept of distance as space. So this is the use of space when we communicate. And there are 4 types of spaces that scholars have written about. The first is called the intimate space or the intimate distance, which you share with people that you are very close to, especially your significant others, your lovers, your spouses, and friends that you are really close with. And this involves a lot of touch and very close behavior. And then you have personal space. This is what you define as your space that you have created, and any encroachment on this particular personal space can be seen as a violation to your individual rights as a person. So until someone is invited into that space, it may be seen as a violation if someone just comes in. So for example, if you are on a phone call and someone leans in towards you and puts their ear close to your phone, that is a violation of personal space. And as human beings, we are conditioned to protect our personal spaces so that people do not just come in anyhow. There is also what is called social space. This is the space that you use with your friends, even relatives, with your classmates, and even with your colleagues as well. There's a certain distance that should be kept within the social space zone. And then there's public space, which is mainly used in a public environment. For example, when delivering a speech in front of a group of people, there's a certain distance that should be maintained. Status, age, and gender affect how distance is used. The fifth type of nonverbal communication is called chronemics, that is the use of time. Coming late shows how much importance you attach to something or an activity. VIPs always come late or delay their entrance at an event. And obviously, this is an indication of the degree of their status. The sixth form of nonverbal communication is tactile communication. Other texts refer to it as haptics, and this is communication via touch. A simple pat on your shoulder from a friend can be a sign of encouragement. So touch as a form of communication is very important in communicating different types of messages, from encouragement to praising someone, even comforting someone. Touch plays an important role in this context. The seventh, a form of nonverbal communication, is olfactics, or the use of the sense of smell. For example, the odors around you send different messages, and you decide whether to go to a certain place or avoid it. Depends on the smell that comes from that particular place. The last form of communication that we will address in this discussion is appearance. The way an individual dresses and the artifacts that they use or choose to adorn themselves with communicates messages. Dress indicates importance, status, and even hints about a person's background and the social groups to which they belong. As a form of communication, nonverbal communication also has barriers that are associated with it. For example, the violation of someone's private space, that is by getting too close. So space violation can function as a barrier to communication. When certain gestures are used and they are not understood by the receiver, they can be barriers and therefore cause a misunderstanding in the communication situation. Nonverbal communication also shows that there are barriers or problems related with the sender. If the sender lacks familiarity or consideration of the receiver's cultural background, that could also cause negative or unwanted responses. Nonverbal communication can also be seen through the choice of channel, and since nonverbal communication mainly uses the body in interpersonal communication, if a wrong part of the body is used to send a message to a person, then that particular channel may not be the most appropriate. So, for example, instead of using your face or your eyes to send a particular message, and instead you use your hands to send that message, depending on the context, the choice of channel in that sense may not be very appropriate. So that could be a barrier to communication. Nonverbal communication also exhibits barriers in terms of the receiver. The failure to decode a nonverbal message happens almost all the time with receivers. A receiver can be offended by a particular gesture, that is if it wasn't the sender's intention. So nonverbal communication then uses signs and symbols, and it is expressed without the use of words. So it is important that as communicators, we are able to distinguish the functions of nonverbal communication, and we are also able to differentiate the types of nonverbal communication. One of the most important aspects of nonverbal communication that almost every communicator now in the 21st century should have is cultural awareness, because it is very easy to offend others and to even close communication with other people.